thrilled to have a first-hand account of some very important ongoing excavations, or perhaps this phase of them has been completed, from the Givati car park in Jerusalem, a site some of you will know well, a site that ranges through the centuries. But our focus today is on 4th century CE Jerusalem, and our speaker, Dr. Yana Tchekhanovets, is a lead archaeologist on the site. She has been co-directing a 10-year project which began in 2007. She's a senior research archaeologist at the Israel Antiquities Authority and a senior lecturer in classical archaeology at Gurion University of the Negev. Yana is busy at the moment writing up these excavations. She has worked in quite a wide range of fields, including also on the Caucasian archaeology of the Holy Land, author of a book on Armenian, Georgian, and Albanian communities between the 4th and 11th centuries. So she is a historian of late antiquity as well as an archaeologist. And today's lecture, I'm sure, will make a radical difference to our understanding of the Christianization of Jerusalem during the late Roman and early Byzantine period. Welcome, Yana, and now I'm handing over to you.
Thank you very much, Tessa, for this beautiful introduction. I am delighted to see so many people interested in this transitional period and this dark ages in the history and the archaeology of the city, since most of the finds that you will see today were only preliminary published or still unpublished at all. I hope it will be interesting for all of you, not just professional archaeologists and historians, but anyone who wants to understand the destiny of people in this complicated city. I hope I am well heard and will be well seen now. Trying to share my screen with you. Okay. Please let me know if it's okay. Yes or no?
Yes, it's perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. So here we will start. Until recently, the archaeological data related to the Roman city of Jerusalem was extremely limited. And the same is true regarding our historical knowledge of the city. It's true dark ages in the history of Jerusalem. And perhaps it's the place to say that this city, often described as the most excavated city on earth, has its many dark ages, and late Roman period is only one of them. Not to let us to be lost in time and space, when we're talking about the Roman Jerusalem of the 4th century, it's of course not the same Jewish city in its fame and glory, totally destroyed by Roman legionaries in the year 70, but a Roman colony of Aelia Capitolina, as we can say for sure today, established by Emperor Adrian in the year 1930. Some 20 years ago, only 20 years ago, we were not sure even about the precise date of the city foundation or the reason of its establishment. Was it a punishment for Bar Kokhba revolt, or on the contrary, the city foundation actually served as a casus belli for the uprising? We are equally unaware, even today, of the city limits and of its final days, when actually Aelia Capitolina stopped to exist and Jerusalem comes back to the stage. Was it after 324, after the Christianization, the beginning of the Christianization of the empire, or in 363, when a devastating earthquake destroyed the late Roman city, and whatever was rebuilt was understood already as a Byzantine Jerusalem? If it's so, why in 638, when Caliph Omar signs his agreement with the residents of Jerusalem, they still calling the city Aelia, which is amazing. After all the centuries of Byzantine rule, they still remember the name. So there are more questions than answers. Nearly 200 years of the city history were almost completely missing, as smashed between two very dominant archaeological layers: the early Roman Jewish Jerusalem of the 1st century and the Byzantine Christian metropolis of the 5th, 7th century. The city was described as insignificant, with mainly military population that starts to grow and develop just in the 4th century following the Christianization and the beginning of mass Christian pilgrimage. There are almost no literary sources dealing with Roman Aelia and no visual sources at all. It's not by chance that on any publication dealing with late Roman city or Roman Aelia, we see the poor Madaba map, this famous Byzantine map of the city, made in the 1st third of the 6th century, that is used often as an illustration for both Byzantine and Roman, and sometimes even early Islamic town, simply because there is no other visual source to speak about the city. This paucity, of course, gave an enormous freedom to researchers' fantasy. As more time passed, as smaller the city became in the imagination of scholars, finally shriveled in the half size of the old city. Today, we can look at this plan prepared by Doron Bar, a well-known and very important researcher working on the problems of late antiquity. He summarized the known archaeological remains, and that's the plan he presented in 1998 in his article. Today, it's looked like a caricature. The plan of Roman city of Jerusalem changed completely because of the archaeological excavations that were done in the city in the last 20 years. However, even to minimalists, among the minimalists, it was obvious that that Romans left is mainly a very deep mark on the city layout and its topography. It's seen until our days. The grid of main Roman streets is clearly seen in Jerusalem, and actually the main Roman arteria are still dividing the old city into 4 quarters: Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and the Armenian quarter, from where we are broadcasting today. We do knew some of the impressive monuments of the Roman city, as this beautiful sort of triumphal arch, a Cheomo arch, as it's known in the Christian tradition, standing in Via Dolorosa. You see its beautiful photo during its exposure in 1864. What was it? It's okay?
Absolutely fine.
Okay. So we have some epigraphic funds, quite bigger, mainly reused in later walls of the town as a simple building material, as this beautiful Roman Antonian dedicatory inscription found in the masonry of the southern wall of Haram, Temple Mount. And we had, of course, numismatic evidence of great importance, providing us with very precise information regarding the official cults of Aelia Capitolina and its shrines. That was more or less all. Perhaps we should add a number of sculptural fragments, perhaps a number of gemstones, and that was all our knowledge. So not surprising that for many researchers, this city was something of a very poor and insignificant kind. The first one to raise a brow regarding its insignificance was, one of the first one was Israel Roll, an Israeli researcher of Tel Aviv University who spent many years studying the grid of Roman roads in Judea and Palestine. And he was first one to pay attention on the fact that the grid of the roads coming to Aelia Capitolina or from Aelia Capitolina, as they can be studied according to the milestones spread along them, are showing some great interest in travel and transportation towards the city. Wasn't that insignificant? But the real change in our understanding of area, its urban layout, planning stages, and monumental structures came in last 2 decades with large scale salvage excavations of Israel Antiquities Authority, mainly salvage excavations in the historical basin of the city. On the difference of academic excavations provided by universities, the salvage excavation that had in its main goal to save the antiquities prior to the beginning of constructive works on certain spot or touristic development of the city, are not preparing themselves to specific periods or not searching for specific finds. They are simply excavating whatever comes layer by layer. In the case of Jerusalem, layers can be too many. I believe that 20 years ago, no one archaeological institution in Israel or abroad would put to itself such a goal to discover the remains of Aelia Capitolina. I think everyone thought that it's an impossible goal because in a general understanding, the city left almost no archaeological remains. On the contrary, the salvage excavation exposing layer by layer in recent years found very many imported evidences dated to the days of Aelia, the beginning of the city, its first phases, its last days, as in the case with the finds that I'm going to show you now. And from these bricks, we succeed now to start to build the general image of this town, and we understand much more about it than we previously had. Just to mention the excavations that seems to me the most important spots dealing with our understanding of Aelia Capitolina. It was, first of all, the excavation of the northern necropolis of the city, north of Damascus Gate, an excavation run by Gidon Avni and Zubair Adawi. You can see the remains of late Roman cemetery, later shaped by Byzantine quarries that destroyed the cemetery almost completely, except the most interesting remains all made in the burials themselves, lead beautiful decorated sarcophags, human bones, different finds following the dead. This excavation had a great importance in drawing the line of the boundaries of the ancient city. Another important site is the Western Wall Plaza excavations run by Shlomit Wexler-Bdolach, Alexander On, and Shua Kislevich for many years. You see what a picturesque location. This is a multi-layered stratified excavation of the site starting from the Iron Age and finishing in some late days of Ottoman rule. But what is important for our case, in this excavation, the eastern corridor of Jerusalem, one of the main streets of the city, was exposed, and oddments of the initial phase of the establishment of the city were discovered on a very small area, very precise and very important finds. Under these arches and these houses facing the square, another important excavation is located, so-called Wilson Arch excavation, where there's three colleagues standing in the middle of the photo, Joe Ziel, Teila Lieberman, and Avi Solomon, exposed a very interesting structure, a small theater, or perhaps an Odeon, or perhaps a Bouleuterion, city council hall. They call it theater-shaped structure, not to go into interpretation. Dated from very first days of existence of Aelia Capitolina. And finally, Givati site, I cannot complain on the location as well, marked by the yellow arrow, excavated by Doron Ben-Ami and myself for 10 years, for one long season lasting 10 years. The site is still under exposure, also in our days. We left it in 2016, and different expedition continues to work there. It's an expedition led by Yuval Gadot of Tel Aviv University and Iftach Shalef of Israel Antiquities Authorities, who is in the story, can guess that they are mainly interested in Iron Age remains and continue to excavate by the classical and post-classical periods of the site were excavated by us. A long process of the analysis and the publication, the final publication of the finds from this site will take many more years. I am glad to inform that we are finally approaching the proper work on late Roman site, because before that we were busy with Byzantine and early Islamic remains, but I hope that the monography, the final report of these periods will be published already in this year. But the understanding of late Roman remains, this last archaeological discoveries turn the study of late Roman Aelia and of Roman Aelia in general to one of the most vibrant research subjects. two important works were recently published dedicated to various aspects of the city research. First of all, that's collected papers on this gray volume of Journal of Roman Archaeology series, Roman Jerusalem, a New Old City, edited by Guido Navdi and Guy Stiebel. And the second one is a book written by Shlomit Wexler-Bdolach, the blue one, Aelia Capitolina, Jerusalem in the Roman period. Shlomit is mainly focusing on the big subjects, fortifications, yes or no, the planning of the city, its layout, its main streets, and so on. It's based on the results of her excavations and her PhD dissertation written on these subjects. More we learn about the Roman area, and more evident it becomes that it was a proper Roman city with all its necessary components and institutions, quite similar to any other city within the borders of the Roman Empire, no matter where the city is located. We see the same patterns in Libya or in Serbia, and it's one of the most amazing things about the Roman times. You can travel thousands of kilometers and in the most unexpected places to see the same material culture and to say, oh, we saw it already in Jerusalem, in Leptis Magna, in Sirmium, and so on. So Jerusalem is quite the same, but they say with only one exception, of course, it's a holy city. So everything was different here. All the process of transformation, the step to Christianization, of course, was done easily, quickly, without no pain. The holy city was just waiting for Elena and Constantine to come and raise the cross. So let's see, was it really so? Givati excavations, we are coming back to this spot. The official name of the excavation in the beginning was Givati parking lot excavation, and this photo shows you why. It really was a parking lot once. On this photo made after the first season of excavation, you can see some exposed ancient remains, but the parking is still working on. Slowly, we ate all the asphalt and not a single car could park there. The site is located on a slope. So the depth of archaeological layer from the modern asphalt to the bedrock varies from 3 to 16 meters. There are 11 strata, one above another, Iron Age down, Abbasid period up, and somewhere in the middle, something that interests us today, this late Roman mansion. It's so large that it actually takes almost the whole site. It has 2 courtyards. One of them is a simple yard, and another one, smaller one, is a peristyle with the galleries from 3 sides. This peristyle courtyard opens towards the larger yard, and series of rooms surrounding these 2 courtyards, rooms lavishly adorned with mural paintings and stucco decoration and so on. The total area that this structure occupies is nearly 2,000 square meters. Just now it came to my mind that should transfer it from the metric system, but perhaps
we can do metrics.
Please do. nearly 2,000 meters, or for those who are unable to do it, there is a scale down here showing you the size of the structure. Dozens of coins were discovered within the rooms of this structure, with no one dated later than 361. We believe that the building was founded in the last years or days of the 3rd century, or in the very beginning of the 4th one, but it was definitely destroyed in 363, and it was destroyed by an earthquake, as we shall very quickly see. This structure showed a characteristic of a rich private dwelling with very large spaces intended for public usage. So it's in the same time as many other late antique mansions, it's in the same time a private building and so with some public functions, let's say like this. The structure did not stand alone in the empty field outside the borders of Jerusalem. Apparently, during the late Roman period, the entire area to the south of the Ottoman city walls, marked by red here, just for the convenience of understanding of where we are, all this area to the south of Temple Mount, often Temple Mount, the term to Roman sanctuary, was built up by luxurious mansions, forming some sort of well-planned residential quarter, following a very strict orthogonal plan. It's the same south, north, east, west axes as in all the other parts of the city where we can see the hand of Roman planning. So we are not talking here about the villa, but rather about the city mansion standing in the middle of a complete quarter. As you can see, the Givati site structure is the biggest one of all the exposed architectural remains and also completely excavated. We can see that both modern excavations and old excavations, as the famous dig of Crawford and Fitzgerald, but also late Roman remains were exposed. In such a cases, we are talking about much smaller, much more fragmentary architectural remains. But in any case, the lines of this orthogonal plan are very well seen. The whole quarter had a very violent end, and it was destroyed by an earthquake in 363. And therefore, let's say, was found very well preserved. The walls of late Roman mansion, some of them are standing to the height of 5 meters, as you can see, comparing to the size of one of our excavators' girls. Sealed by the collapse of the earthquake and on the top by Byzantine garden soil layer, this late Roman mansion, for the first time in the archaeology of Jerusalem, present a great variety of sealed finds. Pottery, glass, architectural decor, all characteristic to the first half of the 4th century. Because it's a sealed and well-dated assemblage, it also gives us an opportunity to look at the other previously excavated sites within the city and outside it, and perhaps to give finer tuning regarding its dating. Perhaps some of the sites that were previously dated to early Byzantine period are actually in comparison to Givati assemblages, can be redated to slightly earlier period. This sealed assemblage also preserved a very important findings related to religious life of the residents of Aelia. It's quite rare in archaeological record. We are usually not able to say much about the spiritual life of the people when we are excavating their homes. We can say much when we are digging a temple, but in this case, we are talking about a private dwelling. So this cultic assemblage is quite unusual because of its provenance from domestic and not cultic context. But it gives us a very rare opportunity to spot to a private religion of the city residents and also to some public cults perhaps performed at the site. And before we will move to clearly religious or magic objects, just to show you some beautiful stuff, the excavation revealed a large number of everyday objects decorated with, I would say, mythological, pagan, traditional motifs, or with the representations of pagan deities. This category of evidence include ivory finds and bone carvings and objects of personal adornment and even ceramic lamps. No one of these objects seems to have had any proper cultic functions, but the decoration reflects the world of cultural and symbolic associations of the dwellers. Of course, the most popular in this group is the motif of Dionysus and his cortege, appearing in all kinds of various media. This enduring popularity of Dionysiac cults, especially in the East, is quite known phenomenon apparent from many artistic representations. Among the proper cultic finds, first to mention is an alabaster eagle standing on a small pedestal. It's not a large sculpture. Maybe together with the pedestal, it's not more than 25 centimeters high, but it was intentionally broken into pieces, and these different fragments were discovered in different contexts, in different spots of the excavated area. Of course, eagle is associated with an emperor, the imperial cult, and the Roman army. And we know of the close connection between the Capitoline cult, established already during the days of the foundation of the colony, Capitolina in 1930, and to the cult practices of the city residents and the soldiers of the 10th Legion. There are some interesting finds made in 19th century related to the eagle and Temple Mount nearby. So perhaps this poor alabaster symbol, the head was never discovered. Maybe we miss it. Perhaps this symbol has to do something with the most important cults of Aelia Capitolina. The structure reveals evidence for the cult of household gods. We have only one niche-like installation exposed in one of the rooms of the structure. Don't pay attention to this wooden beams. That's an attempt to not to let the wall to fall too early. All the pictures are, of course, made in the field. Perhaps it's more interesting. Perhaps it's less clean. So this niche that you see on the photo is located on a very convenient height from the floor and providing a very easy access. And from inside, it was covered with 2 layers of very gentle, very thin white plaster. We found no sculptures and no paintings inside, and still we want to propose that it was a lararium. The archaeological evidence about lararia so well attested during the imperial period, especially in Pompeii and Herculaneum, becomes more and more scarce in the late antiquity, and usually not more than empty niches were preserved from this lararia, devoid of any statuettes or painting. No lararia were previously reported from Jerusalem, but we have a very interesting gemstone, a gemma from Benjamin Mazar excavations. According to the identification proposed by Orit Peleg Barkat, who studied it has a presentation of household altar that decorates one of the stones. So perhaps we have a lararium. Additional data regarding the household rituals comes from the intentional deposition of the intact cooking pots in the fill layer under the floors, recorded in the 2 rooms of the mansion. Also, the excavation did not reveal any signs of the original content of these cooking pots. It seems that the find can be safely interpreted as foundation deposits. The rituals related to foundation deposits are unknown to classical authors, but seems to present some continuation of very well-known ancient Near Eastern tradition, also well attested in archaeology of the region for biblical periods. Recently, similar deposits of the cooking pots dated to the Roman period were reported from archaeological excavations at Gerasa and Dura-Europos, apparently containing some burned bones of birds. Perhaps we have some cereal inside the pots. Impossible to understand. No bones. We have another evidence of local domestic cults coming from a very large corpus of locally produced terracotta figurines of so-called Beit Natsif type. Beit Natsif is a small village not far away from Jerusalem, where the workshop that produce lamps and such figurines was discovered in early 30s. Mold-made mass production figurines represent or nude female figures or horse riders, children, and birds. It's the largest group of Beit Natsif figurines discovered outside the workshop of Beit Natsif itself, and the 3rd site in Jerusalem where such figurines were discovered. There is a large number of these figurines found outside the city, recently summarized by Achim Lichtenberger, that we heard his name already today. Regardless of the very large number of finds, we actually know nothing about this figurines' function or even identification. It's associated with private worship and domestic cults. We have no literary sources talking about such sort of devotion. So we don't know who are these female deities and heroes on the horses. Perhaps I should regard it in the general frame of religious problematic of late antiquity with its extremely flexible religious identity. Few finds discovered at the excavation belong to magic or apotropaic sphere. This include, for example, this beautiful magic gemstone and the part of abecedarium inscription, the alphabetic inscription, containing usually the beginning and sometimes the complete alphabet, Greek or Latin. You see, alphabet, gamma, delta, epsilon. Here it starts. Perhaps there was a continuation, perhaps not. We have also fragments of clay masks and mirrors made of clay. But the most interesting find is a fold lid tablet inscribed with curse text in Greek, prepared by professional magician. Here is the text. It was published by the main specialist on late Roman spells, Robert Daniel. And from the text, we understand that it was ordered by a woman named Kyrilla against a man called Yenis. Perhaps he was an owner of the house. It contains binding spells and appeals to different gods, mainly the gods of the underworld. It was discovered in the collapsed layer of the second floor of the mansion, and most probably it was originally deposited close to the place where this poor Yenis, the potential victim, lived or worked. We also have some interesting evidence of public ceremony related to sacrifice. It was discovered in one of the water cisterns of our complex, marked by blue, where a large number of pig jaws, or mainly piglets, were found, belonging to at least 52 young piglets. It seems that the animals were the meat was eaten, and their heads were thrown into the cistern as an offering to the gods. Clearly that would happen only in the very last days of the complex, because who will dare to pollute the water source of the house? The assemblage of Givati in general present a fantastic religious diversity with pure Roman and foreign cults, with the clear marks of late antique syncretism, with domestic cults, public ceremonies, and magic. Now tell me you what is missing here. Just to remind, we're talking about the year 363 when the structure was destroyed. The Holy Sepulchre Church supposed to stand on its place already for 30 years at least. And when we think about the mid-4th century Jerusalem, of course, we think about Constantine and Helena, the construction of the main sanctuaries of the city, followed by pilgrimage. And here, in this structure, this late Roman mansion built right in the city center, what actually we see? Is this the city that Bordeaux pilgrim walked, where all its Christian identity? In reality, there are some Christian finds, very, very modest, few graffiti incisions. They were discovered dislocated from their original placement, but it seems that all are coming from the plaster on the wall in one of the galleries of the peristyle courtyard. The graffiti presents signs and symbols typical for early Christian world, more common for sacred places rather than for private house. Palm branch, Christogram sign, the word Kyrios, and so on. This content, clearly Christian content of the graffiti, is very surprising in contrast to the pagan cults practiced in the structure. We can say that the graffiti was scratched by servants or slaves already Christian, or we can say that it was done when the structure stood in ruins. Doesn't work very well stratigraphically, but everything is possible. But what I would like to say, it's actually actually one of the first material expressions of Christian faith in Jerusalem, together with very few counted parallels from the venerated sites of the city. This rare finds will be published already next month in the Festschrift dedicated to the Franciscan archaeologist Eugenio Aliata. We are planning to publish an article with this Christian graffiti. Since the excavated mansion is the first complete dwelling complex of the time exposed in Jerusalem, practically speaking, its cultic assemblage has no parallels for comparison. So it's very hard to interpret it. Is it really the last stronghold of the paganism in the city, or it's a true reflection of the religious situation in Jerusalem in 363? And did we find the material evidence of reactionary paganism of Julian the Apostate? Based on the literary sources of the time, the Christianization of Jerusalem, the religious center of the new era, is generally interpreted as a smooth and relatively fast process, very different from painful reality of the major urban centers of the Mediterranean world. However, the evidence presented here is showing far more complex and diverse religious panorama of the city in the middle 4th century. And I hope that the finds that you saw in the last 45 minutes will prepare you perhaps to the new understanding of this transitional period, to the understanding that for Jerusalem, it was not less easier than for Rome or Gaza or any other important city of the time. That's all. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Very well.
Thank you. You've left us with so many questions, a real buzz, and I think I'm going straight away to invite people via the chat, as Anthony Rabin suggested, to bring their questions to you, and I will, let me get onto the chat. I will call on people. We don't have any questions yet. They will come, I'm sure. In the meantime, may I ask one? Yana, I just wanted, it's slightly tangential, but it is the case, is it that none of your work the late antique stratum in the Givati car park has shed light on whether any Jewish presence remained in the city? Because that's also slightly an open question, isn't it? It's not completely excluded that some Jews remained around. I don't know if there is anything you can say about that, or is it way beyond?
Unfortunately, the late Roman stratum at Givati site did not show any possible Jewish presence. Below the large Roman mansion, we have few strata of Hellenistic, late Hellenistic, Herodian and early Roman city, but since the destruction in 70, no material mark of Jewish presence at this very spot.
Right. Thank you. That's what I thought you'd say. Now, we do have an interesting and important question from Oded. Are you there, Oded? And can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm here.
Then
Hi,
do.
First of all, I would like to thank the giver of the lecture for talking about the city that I didn't have the chance to visit, obviously, lately. But I was wondering, as I wrote in the chat, about literary evidence of people talking about the city and maybe the diversity of religion there, as you might expect of, in general, historical writing about events and people and so on. Do we find similar things regarding the city?
We do not have other dwelling structures with such a rich finds testifying the religious life of people. So it's very, very difficult to jump to immediate conclusions. We are planning in a couple of next years to start a study that will be focused on the people of Aelia, not that much on the buildings as on the people. What the material finds can tell us, can explain us about the people of the city, their individuality, their religious belief, their daily life, and so on. So we will take the Givati finds as a core, and we hope to combine it with a study of everything that was published recently or many years ago regarding this period, and try to answer these questions regarding city population.
Thank you, but actually I meant, do we have contemporary literary evidence?
No.
Okay.
Unfortunately, no.
Well, maybe in the future. Thank you.
Literary evidence, perhaps not in the future, but archaeological, I hope so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. May I just add to that and ask you, you gave us this tantalizing suggestion that it's connected, so that we ought somehow to consider, or could consider, Julian's attempt to rebuild the temple and his paganization at about in the 360s. If so, then we have literary evidence, of course, for that. What would you make of it all, of that connection?
I think it's an attempt of such intellectual compromise between what we knew before about Jerusalem in the middle 4th century, with all its Christian narrative, with early pilgrimage, and with finds, eagle, the heads of pigs thrown into well. Well, it's all very speculative, but I think that this Julian episode in the history of the city deserves some attention, also archaeological. I see Shimon Gibson is asking a question, why the mansion was not rebuilt after 363. Shimon, I guess you have the best knowledge of this excavation among all the people presented here. You visited many times. Actually, part of the Roman structure was rebuilt in Byzantine period. Why not all? Hard to say. They were lazy to work on the collapse layers. They simply covered it with 1.5 meters of sifted soil, perfect for gardening. There was a public, perhaps not public garden, but sort of agricultural terraces sitting on the top of this late Roman remains and protecting them for us. But one part of the structure, one of its wings, was rebuilt during the Byzantine period, probably served as administrative building of some kind. And that was the structure, very large hoard of Byzantine coins were discovered. We have an idea that it has to do with Persian conquest of Jerusalem in 614, but that's a layer above the only part of the structure that was rebuilt.
Possibly, Yana, is it that because of the cultural, religious diversity of the structure leaning more towards paganism, that perhaps there was another motive behind the lack of the rebuilding of this structure?
Perhaps.
Is this something you could toy with, or you think that's nonsense?
To toy with, yeah, that's an expression.
Now, I think Nick Brett would like to ask a question.
David is raising his hand for a long time.
We're not going through the chat. All right, David, on you go.
Sorry, I haven't worked it all out. Just a very quick question. I'm quite excited by this because we know that in the Byzantine period, of course, Jerusalem extended southwards and they built the wall southwards. Now we've got some rationale for that. It didn't happen suddenly, it happened gradually, it happened over a period. But when you look at maps, reconstructions of the plan, including one you've shown, most of the settlement indicated, certainly the residential part of the settlement of Aelia, was north of the main decumanus, what is now David Street, the northern half of the old city. Now what seems to emerge is that those houses south of the present wall of the old city don't just suddenly appear in the middle of nowhere, they're part of an urban development. So the question is, what happened? What evidence do we have of Aelia in west of the Temple Mount in the present Armenian and Jewish quarters of the old city?
This early development of the city north of the Kumanos, that's exactly what the plan of Doron Bar presents. Most of the public structure of the city are indeed there. Since till now we cannot solve the question of 10th Legion camp, which part of the city it was located. It's amazing. We have no answers almost to all the questions we are asking about Aelia. It is very difficult to follow the precise stages of the city development. We don't know what's happened that the town starts to expand southwards. But I believe that it has something to do with the Siloam pool and its usage during the late Roman times. After all, that's the only source of water, natural source of water in the city, and we know from literary sources about some nymphaeon, some structure standing up above the waters, and some street leading from the Siloam pool of early Roman period north to the city. And I believe that this quarter of 4th century start to develop along the street, the same as it's happened, as we know well, in Byzantine Jerusalem, when Siloam pool turned to a very important Christian site with the church, one of the focuses.
Sorry, haven't they found some votive remains in the Siloam pool from the Roman period?
Our colleagues are working now on some structures erected near the Siloam pool, slightly north of it, already in the period between the two revolts. That's their dating. I don't remember, perhaps Shimon knows, I don't remember of any votives From Siloam Pool? No. Bethesda, perhaps, yeah. Not in the Siloam Pool, but we are learning now about more and more signs of the southern area of the city wasn't only quarries and gardens, perhaps, but was developed slowly, and sometimes in the 4th century, it just was a constructive boom. But I think it's important to stress that this development of the city to the southern direction has nothing to do with the Christianization, as we can see, as it's very clearly reflected in the finds that we saw today, and similar finds from other excavated sites in the area.
Thank you, Yana. That's a good answer.
Thank you. And now Nick Brett has a question about Dionysus, I believe. Nick, are you there? Nick Brett?
Nick, you have to unmute yourself. You're on mute.
Okay.
No, good.
Yeah,
is it all right?
Yes.
Yes, there is.
Thank you very much for your...
Tacitus talked about the Jews worshipping Dionysus, and this seems to be perhaps there was a very big cult of Dionysus from earlier times in Jerusalem, and this is carried on. Do we have any other Dionysic cultic sort of evidence outside of Jerusalem?
Yes.
Is it just specific to Jerusalem?
No, it's not specific to Jerusalem. It's a most popular Hellenistic Roman cult in the Romanized or Hellenized East, I believe. We have many evidences of the appearance of Dionysus in the region, starting from the Hellenistic period.
Thank you. Great. Well, I have no more questions via the chat. Is there anyone else who's having trouble with that and keen to ask a question? Otherwise, I think we... Yes?
May I ask my question?
Yes.
Nicole.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your lecture and for your warning on historiographical model in order to explain things. If we come back to the Julian's hypothesis, I was very much interested in the jaws. Can you say, or can archaeologists can say, if all the jaws were thrown at the same time, or is it a longer process?
No, it's a momental deposition. It's happened in the same moment. Mm-hmm. All the jaws were thrown to the well in the same moment. Mm-hmm. From what we know from the historical sources, from literary sources dealing with Greek and Roman sacrifices, the piglet is a very usual sacrifice in the ceremonies that involve few participants, a group of participants, each one holding his piglet. That's something like this. To which cults, pig was quite common sacrifice for many cases. If we want to toy with Julian for Mars, for example, in war times, it was also very useful during the mystery cults ceremonies and sacrifices, and of course chthonic gods. It's look like nothing but the heads of the pigs were thrown into the well. Zooarchaeological laboratory work on the finds for very long time, and they find no other pig bones in the well, but just the jaws. They explain it in a way that the jaw is the strongest part of the pig scalp, and if other parts of the scalp could be dissolved in a mud, in a humid atmosphere of the water well with its mud on the bottom, the jaws remain in a very, very good preservation state, and that's what we found. Most of the jaws belong to young animals.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can start to speculate and write books about the Parthian march, Parthian war of Julian, and sacrifices he made in Jerusalem. Jewish temple rebuilt just some 100 meters above, and ceremony, including the sacrifice of the pigs, was performed on the footsteps of the Temple Mount. Whatever you prefer.
A very nice fiction.
Yeah, purely unscientific. So let's stuck to the facts.
Well, thank you so much, Yana, for both for encouraging and for curbing our speculation. That was these are wait a minute. We have a question from Susan. Is that Susan Weingarten? Would you like to ask it, Susan, straight away, without more ado?
I see also.
Can you unmute
Hi.
yourself?
Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Yep. Very well.
Yes. I'm very interested in those jaws because in a Jewish tradition, the jaw, the lower jaw, was what was given to the priest in the temple. It was biblically, and I think also there are some Greek sources which imply that the tongue was the best part, and it was the part that was given to the priest, to the pagan priests. So you've got all the religions, if you like, here.
As we know, during the sacrifice ceremony, the animals were dedicated to the gods, but not usually not burned completely. That was some kind of grand party made by the participants of the ceremony, and the meat was eaten by them, and the head or a jaw, I believe that the whole head was actually burned or given to gods, or in this case, thrown into the water cistern. I think Gunnar want to ask a question.
ערב טוב, תודה רבה. I'm interested in the building technology. How different is this structure from structures that existed some 300 years earlier in late Hellenism? So if you look at the peristyle villa, for example, in Pompeii, around the time of Augustus, and you compare this with this building some 300 years later, is there a recognizable evolution of architecture?
Yes, of course. The Roman architecture, especially provincial Roman architecture, adopts this Hellenistic Oriental trends very naturally, but we know that it comes even to Rome itself if we look at the Pompeian villas.
But Rome does not build any villa after 300. There are no villas built in Rome.
Not the Rome itself, but perhaps Italy, Italic provinces. We see that in the east, especially in Syrian region, the closest parallels to this structure we find in Syria. perhaps Lebanon. The evidence from there is more fragmentary, but all these wonderful houses of Antiochia, Daphna, they're quite similar.
Yeah.
It's not a proper Hellenistic peristyle. It's, of course, not a proper Roman house, but some combination. One of the most interesting characteristics of the structure is the knowledge to build on a slope. It's amazing how the structure is located on the slope.
Like in Ephesus,
it's one floor where the bedrock is high, and it's two floors going down the slope. Fantastic, very interesting.
Can I add to the coins a question? The coinage? Do I understand that you have coins only from the 280s to the 360s?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Well, I'm not getting them on the chat. I'm assuming that other questions, the questioners who are going
there
about...
is one more question. I see. I
goodness,
see man with raised hand.
From the chat. All right, but this is going to be the last, if that's okay with everyone. Yes, I don't even know who it's from. I'm not seeing all this.
You have to unmute yourself, Dudley.
Yeah, hello.
Dudley. Yeah, yes. Hello.
Can I ask, in Britain, there's a severe decline in the late 4th century in Roman civilization. I've gathered that is not the explanation for why the villa was not rebuilt in Jerusalem. So when did the decline take place in Roman culture in Jerusalem?
Our best decline is the 3rd century. Prior to the construction of this building. And then, on the contrary, pilgrimage gives a good push to Jerusalem, and sometime in the 6th, early 7th century, it's reached quite a good economic situation. So, no, our structure was ruined by earthquake and not rebuilt. I don't know why it was not rebuilt, but that's all I can say. Thank you for 52 braves that stay with us till the very end.
The discussion was interesting too, but particularly thank you again for an outstanding lecture, a wonderfully painted historical context, incredible clarity, and really a lovely presentation of a really, really fascinating dig. So can we all express our thanks to Yana in the usual sort of way, or thumbs up?
Lovely, lovely. Thank you very much.
Bravo.
Thank you for your attention, and thank you.
Bye-bye.
Very much.
So that brings our events to a close, I think.